Are you finding it a bit difficult to find really good food in the average supermarket? I began to look into this a smidgen, and so I looked at some of the history. And just very briefly, bear with me just for 1 minute. In 1921, the very first burger bar or burger restaurant was created in Kansas. It wasn't until around about 1948 that the McDonald's brothers created their first takeaway, and they did that because they recognized that more women were going to work and more people were driving. And so they concluded correctly that women didn't want to cook, they didn't have time, and they'd much rather take a whole meal back without having to do any work. So they created the first drive-through, McDonald's drive-through, the first one in Chicago. In the meantime, the cigarette companies come round about the early 60s, round about 60s. They felt the pinch because governments were beginning to squeeze on taxes on cigarettes. Philip Morris and Reynolds were the two biggest cigarette companies at the time. And so they decided that they would develop their sales of cigarettes in what we used to call the third world, where populations were increasing much more rapidly. And so they decided to buy up the industrial food industry, companies like Nestle and Cadbury's and Heinz, and you could go on, and the list is endless. But they took with them all the biochemists and the scientists that knew a thing or two about addiction, which they had used in the manufacture of cigarettes. And they applied this information to their food industry. And secondly, there were restrictions on the age groups that they could sell cigarettes to, but those restrictions didn't apply to food. So they got to work and they set to aiming their product at young children and making sure that their product was addictive. And weren't they successful? Anyway, come round about 1962, 63, they took off, and in 2000, round about 2000, the late 90s, they stopped. They sold off their food industry because they had built up such a successful cigarette trade in the third world. So that effectively is the history of how we've come to have to accept industrialized food. Most of it is processed or highly processed, and that's another story altogether. But just thought you might be interested in how it came about and why modern food, a lot of modern food, is so addictive.